Welcome to our second to last session in the 2023 NLM Virtual Symposium on Health Misinformation. We're glad you're able to join us today. I'm Sean Corning, one of the Education and Outreach Coordinators with NNLM Region 7. We have just a few technical items to cover. All the attendees have been muted, but we welcome your questions, comments, and any discussion in the Zoom chat at any time. But we would prefer, if you have questions for any of our presenters today, that you put them into the question and answer function, especially since we have two different presentations today. That will just help us keep track of the questions, because we're going to be doing questions in a combined Q&A session at the end. If you're using the chat, be sure to select everyone from the drop-down menu when posting your comments. Just that make sure that everyone can see them. We have a live closed captioner for this event. You can access it by clicking on the icon with the 3 dots at the bottom of your Zoom program and then selecting closed caption. If you would like to share on social media, we encourage you to use our hashtag for the event, HealthMisinfoNNLM. And before we get started, I'd like to share one last time a little bit about who we are for those who might not have come to a previous session. So the National Institutes of Health is the nation's leading medical research agency. It's made up of 27 institutes and offices and centers, of which the National Library of Medicine is one. It's also the National Library of Medicine is also the world's largest medical library and produces online resources like PubMed and Medline Plus. So the NNLM, the network of the National Library of Medicine, that's us, serves as an education and outreach program for the National Library of Medicine, working to ensure that health professionals and the public have equal access to health information. The NNLM itself is made up of 7 regional medical libraries, 3 national offices, and 4 national centers, all that work together to provide training, funding, engagement opportunities, and programming like this to over 9,000 NNLM member organizations. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this session. He's David Stokes, a PhD candidate at UCLA. Today he'll be presenting on consensus development processes, histories, and relationships to health information recommendation. Thank you so much for being with us today, David. And I'm passing it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Sean, and LM. Can you guys see everything?
Yes, it's looking great.
Sounds great, thank you. So yes, I'll be talking about consensus development processes. As Sean said, I'm a doctoral candidate at UCLA in the Department of Information Studies, which is in the School of Education and Information Studies. My research looks at the ways in which experts come to agreement. And we'll get more into the specifics a bit later. So for the agenda, the opening, and then I will now go into helping people understand somewhat of the problem and the significance of consensus development, as well as concepts from the literature dealing directly with its histories related to scientific consensus, and then a bit more on my dissertation background, methods, and some preliminary findings. I'm currently in the weeds when it comes to this, so you guys are getting some newer information. Quick understanding for why my dissertation topic is what it is and how it relates directly to my experience. So I've only been in libraries, those that have been in academic and government settings, from an intern into a professional librarian. Most recently, I was partially project manager of events for people considered dignitaries and those that have a high top 1% wealth, and they own quite a few businesses. And so my role was to help them when it came to their meetings. Many of these people, they would come together and congregate and then decide not just on, the content and recommendations for whatever they're discussing, but they also would decide on the rules in which they would engage. And I would help to facilitate some of that, especially when it comes to the design of the rooms and the offices. And so additionally, I conducted research overseas and in Africa. And I think I realized during that part, when looking at information seeking behaviors, explicitly those that deal with collaboration, I noticed many of those actions were reactive. And so that pretty much also honed in on my idea, or I guess reaffirmed the idea that I should look into what happens at the top and how that then disseminates outwardly. So we can understand that consensus usually involves quite a few different people, and it can be in different contexts. My context that I look at is scientific, but we saw it in the Declaration of Independence with quite a few signatories from many male men. We've also seen consensus when it comes to religion and dealing with fellowship. We've also seen consensus in scientific environments, especially like this one, in a Silomar conference, which was in, I think, 1975, where scientists and journalists and scientific communicators all descended on a Silomar to discuss the ways in which they would attack or understand new technologies that dealt with recombinant DNA, and then the ways in which they would articulate their knowledge of such. And then we see consensus as we believe it, that some people believe it to be, among many of the Supreme Court justices. They too oftentimes decide on, well, they'll decide individually based on their own judgments, but they also decide on the laws and the ways in which they want to come to a decision, not necessarily the fact that they're voting, because voting isn't considered consensus, for which certain people, and that's because certain people can lose and others can win, but they still have to decide on the ways in which they want to articulate what those have voted for. So it's some consensus in there, but we see a clear distinction between consensus as a process and the consensus as an outcome. And so looking at all those pictures, I also think of these words. Most people use word clouds, but I don't think that those are as effective as seeing the direct words that to me affiliate with the pictures that we just saw, such as laws, fellowship, government committees, boards, and what have you. And all this leads to this idea that groups are associated with influential books, documents. Although a book is a document, I like to separate it out because of the librarian background, but then also because of the fact that documents can be very different things, or governing policies and bodies. We need to also keep in mind that different stakeholders bring their different personalities and their different social conditionings to these different group meetings. And so those two are things that we need to discuss. And apologies for the background noises. In today's consensus, we have recently seen new discoveries from US reports, and a scientific communicator talked about this in early 2001, actually, but dealing with lab leaks when it comes to COVID-19 and the ways in which not only how we should perhaps proceed post-COVID, but let's try to understand its genesis and directly related to either the lab and or animal to human transfer. So those were interesting discussions to see. Different task forces were formed for issues that dealt with COVID as we were in it, and then post-COVID. Elon Musk, he recently signed, along with many other signatory tech leaders, regarding this idea that perhaps we should halt AI. And this was done also through a third party, a think tank or an institution, similar to the ways in which some of the people and the groups I have been working with and will be working with have conducted. And then FDA just approved some over-the-counter sales of opioid overdose drugs. And FDA uses a very different process than some of the people that groups I'm looking at in institutions, because theirs is a bit more public facing. But all this contributes to these ideas of new normals, how we now have to adapt, not just as people, but have assistive technologies to do the same, as well as our processes and our systems and supply chains, and how all of this is changing and requiring time and energy. This is why I seek to understand how knowledge is negotiated, especially in these closed settings. So for my dissertation, I'm looking at three institutions: National Institutes of Health, National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and RAND. NIH had a program called CDP, which retired in 2013. However, that program is synonymous with a lot of research, and it also helped to change the ways in which other institutions conducted consensus studies. They used a format at times that would be a conference-like, and so now you'll see other places using things like workshops in which they require experts to gather. And then I'll also be looking at RAND. I should back up. I should say that I did have a fellowship at the National Academy, so I was able to see consensus studies behind the scenes, as well as talk to quite a few of our dignitaries when I was there. And then RAND, and I conducted some just informational interviews for them that's not related to the research, but it was an opportunity for me to understand how staffers understand consensus and their goals and their jobs. RAND is in Santa Monica, in California, and they also do consensus, but with the big C. They often employ the Delphi method. Many of the experts that I'm looking at, they are distinguished. They have high H-index scores. They publish, and they publish often, and those publications are in journals with high impact factors. They work oftentimes in exclusive environments, and the work that they do contributes to policy. It contributes to shifting paradigms within their own respective fields, and it contributes to the ways in which publics are, learn to behave, or guidelines that they have to go by, or rules. What I also think is important is for us information professionals to understand our relationship to these different experts. I'd like us to understand also how they mingle, especially after we've conducted what many consider as invisible labor. So once we give that bibliography, or once we hand over that literature review, what then goes on? Are we consulted often? Are we not? And then what are our thoughts on the contributions and the ending result of that? And so this all really does get to this idea too, that we as information professionals, we help to put these systems and these databases into place. We train people on how to use them. And so it now moves not just from that human aspect, but also to that recommendation or recommender systems aspect. Regarding the history of scientific consensus, there are about 4 shifts that I've identified. And this area itself has been extensively studied. It starts with invisible colleges, which were in the 1600s, 17th century, in which people would meet informally at cafes. These are scientists, dignitaries, or what have you, and discuss findings. As a matter of fact, Darwin has noted how he would send his examples to Europe and then would meet with people to discuss them thereafter. And so we then move from this informal idea of invisible colleges to royal societies, and that's when things become a bit more formalized. And in this formalization process, things aren't just about the experts, but also about the different publics. And so the goal for many people during this time was to create the spectacle, was to not only have lab happenings, but to show them in real time to real people, to have somewhat of a witness. And thereafter was scientific revolutions, and Kuhn discusses those extensively within the scientific field and all the inventions and innovations that came out of them. What I also loved about Kuhn's discussion is just not necessarily the product, but also the ways in which teams interact and the stakeholders that are involved. So he drew a difference between veterans and amateurs. He also showed how certain anomalies could happen because of someone's different opinions and getting the other crowd, or the rest of the crowd, to side with that. So his research is quite influential, considering that it covers so many different factors within scientific revolutions. Many of these inventions and these revolutions are documented, and they require research to have not only happen, but then to scale, for them to have bigger reach. And many of the people, especially in the mid 1900s or 1930s to mid 1900s, 1900s, we had different thinkers writing about this, and they also had positions of power, so personal and positional power. And that's Vannevar Bush, Paul Otley, and H.G. Wells. They thought of these ideas of how can we get all this different information on the same system? How can we allow not just national, but international people to join in on the conversations? Or how can we even communicate, not necessarily have dialogue, but how do we talk back and forth regarding some similar or different findings? And then from that, we get to the true mid-1900s and then 1960s or what have you with Derek Price, well, first Eugene Garfield, and then Derek Price. And Eugene Garfield, he really honed in on this idea of there are large-scale citations for which we are really responsible for, especially at this time in helping the scientists. And Derek took this idea that even though there are large-scale citations, there are still little pockets, groups, networks of scientists conducting different experiments and using each other's expertise to further an idea, a thought, an invention, and that would essentially lead to even more published research. This is just some other organizational things that happen, especially when we take into account the different systems and processes and people and documents during the mid-1900s. This leads us to our fourth shift, big science, and that's currently where we are. What's most interesting about this big science idea is the fact that now things are able to be sent in volume and high volumes and high speed and variant things. So it's that diversity as well as the speed, as well as the amount of information people are able to receive. But I love the fact that Livro brought into this idea that judgments and recommendations are still considered a part of that process. It's just a bit of a different one and a bit more cyclical. And so now the goal is from the 2010s onward to really analyze and understand how this is happening. So that gets into my project, which really does hone in on scientists that are trying to basically answer questions in a very short period of time that appear very complex. These questions can have with information overload, so an abundance of information, or information scarcity, where there isn't much known knowledge. And so their cognitive authority may have to come into play. But essentially, these people, they deliberate and they define their level of agreement. And then these deliberations at times can have multiple contradictions and different recommendations. For instance, taking this back to COVID, there were two groups that differed on outcomes of the primary preventative measure. This isn't the only instance. Scientists naturally differ. Scientists, because of the process, will sometimes have errors, and then they'll try again, and then may succeed or may have another error. So the idea that retractions happen, it isn't as, there is entire websites for them, but retractions don't necessarily have to be the worst thing. They can also be looked at as just a part of the process of trying to find the correct and or best answer via different methods. And so I really wanted to hone in on that because I think retractions and misinformation, separate from this, but misinformation and retractions don't always have to be as horrific as they sound or have that negative connotation, when in actuality, they could be a part of the process of getting to a better answer. Certainly misinformation among different publics and the ways in which it spreads fast can be an issue, but it's a later discussion. So different consensus methods, there are quite a few. I'm only looking at the top three, but the FDA has one, as I mentioned, that's more public. There's the nominal group technique, ANSI, who they decide standards, and then RAND, which was a RAND and UCLA convention. There are many, 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 many more. And so dealing directly with the idea of big science, these are just more definitive, explicit, I should say, implications of what has happened now in this fourth paradigm shift. And then I have some different technologies listed and how these recommender systems or recommendation systems use judgment and collaboration, the same things in which Livro was speaking of earlier, to come to answers. And so we can think of Zoom, and we can also think of even meeting minutes, when you're conducting board meetings, those have certain artificial intelligence and machine learning that helps to generate reports. There were also instances in which archaeologists, their answers were tested with technological devices to see which one came with the most correct answer in defining a specific text. And it appeared as if that device was a bit more accurate, but again, more has to be learned. And then there are, of course, many, many, many more tools that assist that are technologically based. And they've all shifted the ways in which many of us communicate remotely and in person. I'm going to speed past the specifics of my collection analysis, but as I told all of you, I am deep in the weeds with it right now. As a matter of fact, I have an interview tomorrow morning at 4:30 with an exceptional, distinguished scientist. I also have another interview next week with another person who deals more so with the technological side. So I'm very excited about that and preparing extensively for both. I'm also at the moment of document collection. I've been doing that for a while as well. So it's a lot going on as we speak. But I've come to this idea that there are three parts of the process, and they are judgment, recommendation, and negotiation. Judgment, not many studies have looked at this, and so that's why it's even more of a reason for me to look at it. But these are some really canonical texts, Goldstein and Hargath, that talk about it. And then there's recommendation, and judgment is a bit more individual aspect. It's when experts use their past and their understanding and their knowledge base and their built and their reasoning skills to decide what they should offer and could offer to the group when it comes to paper and just comments. But recommendation gives us a bit more of that sociological turn, and that this is now something that happens collaboratively, where you're telling someone else what you think. And so it moves it to a more social epistemological perspective. And Ferner talks about this as well, this idea of when you're collaborating, that it requires both the judgment and the collaboration. And so now we're here at negotiation, which is what I've been inclined to focus in on a bit more. And some historical contents rather, explicitly said that, authors have since described scientific consensus as performative. And so some of the things I'm trying to see based off of my early findings and preliminary findings, not trying to see, but what I've discovered are these different things, that collaboration can mean different things to different people, and perhaps coming together on the same project doesn't necessarily mean working together. There's hidden labor in addition to invisible labor. In addition to coded, so invisible labor is what we librarians can offer, but then there's hidden labor, which is what different assistive technologies offer. And then there's an information behavior versus encoded information, and many other things that I'm starting to wonder, like, is the goal to come to an answer versus to challenge what has already been set? This is just a diagram that gets a bit more into my ideas on the invisible labor part and what we contribute when it comes to bibliographies, collection development, databases for them, marketings of certain groups and what they have, and the offerings that we provide them. And then this negotiation, and I put misinformation up there because, again, this is a part of the process for some of the group decision-making that happens with scientists. It's very iterative when it comes to consensus development. It's entangled, and it can yield new knowledge or hinder progress simply because of false consensus, which is when there appears to be agreement, but there isn't, or there could be specific individuals who are dominating while others aren't, conversations, interpretations when it comes to language and culture, that changes things significantly. And even a lack in time, one can think that months is a lot, but if each of these experts are, the heads of big research grants and labs, that takes their time away. And then some have agenda setting motives. And then we can also think about cognitive authority, AI, culture, language, and these other aspects. This is another diagram I'm working on in which there's collaborative software. The production is a document, but that works with the scientists to produce that. But of the collaborative software is automated suggestions. These are some of the differences I noted with the recommendations. And this is pretty much a summary of what I believe we are at, and that is consensus is an authoritative knowledge-making process for which technological advances assist, perhaps influence negotiations in collaborative settings. And then lastly, there are some questions that I have in mind, just thinking about what I choose to do with the rest of the data that I have and what I'm collecting, and then perhaps publications that can come out that deal directly with negotiation. But I noticed that open science is a huge thing right now. And there are also questions of, does crowdsourcing really deplete quality or does it add to it? And then there's this other thing, is that mutually exclusive? Can you not have diversity, but then also have a quality field product? So these are different questions that I have, but that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, David. And if anyone has any questions for David, please place them in the Q&A function of Zoom. We'll be able to answer those at the shared Q&A at the end. And now I'll introduce our second group of speakers for this session. It's my pleasure to introduce Kelsey Cowles, Margie Shepard, Benny Finch, and Jen Ortiz, who will be speaking to you today about crowdsourcing to combat health misinformation on Wikipedia. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, so our presentation hopes to show that crowdsourcing does improve the quality of health information. My name is Jen Ortiz. I'm from the NNLM Region 3 office at the University of North Texas Health Science Center at Fort Worth. And I'll be co-presenting with Kelsey Cowles from the University of Pittsburgh Health Sciences Library System. We're also joined by Benny Finch from NNLM Region 3 at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School, and Margie Shepard from NNLM Region 3, who's currently working out of the University of Kansas Medical Center. So in our talk today, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to describe several ways that Wikipedia's policies and editors work to prevent misinformation, explain how editing campaigns like Cite NLM contribute to improving Wikipedia's health information, and talk about how we can incorporate Wikipedia into programming or classes. But before we dive into it, we have a couple of questions for all those of you in the audience to learn about your use of Wikipedia. So if you could put in the chat, if you use Wikipedia, if you use it, do you use it to find health information? And then finally, we want to know, have you ever edited a Wikipedia article? Because we're going to hope to convince you to do all of these things by the end of our talk today. But before we get into how Wikipedia works to prevent misinformation, I want to start with some information about what Wikipedia is to ensure we all have the same background. Wikipedia is a free online encyclopedia created and edited by volunteers around the world and hosted by the Wikimedia Foundation. It was started in 2001 as a collaborative platform seeking to amass all human knowledge and make it freely accessible. Wikipedia has shown itself to be a nimble, independent publisher, able to block erroneous content and provide rigorous health information that's referenced to credible sources. It's rapidly grown to become the world's largest reference website, with 6.6 million articles in English that attract billions of views every month. Wikipedia averages over 2 edits per second and currently adds 555 articles per day to its English site. Although anyone can edit, it's not a free-for-all. There are 5 pillars that can be considered Wikipedia's principles. First, Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It's written from a neutral point of view. It's free content that anyone can use, edit, and distribute. Fourth, editors should treat each other with respect and civility. And finally, there are no firm rules, only policies and guidelines. And it's not only the general public that turns to Wikipedia for health content. More than 90% of medical students and 50 to 70% of physicians use the online encyclopedia as a source for health information. Google often features Wikipedia articles at the top of its search results, so many searchers will end up on Wikipedia even if they don't start there. Misinformation has always been an issue on social media, but the COVID-19 pandemic emphasized the challenges and potentially deadly consequences of untrue information circulating on digital platforms. While social media has struggled to contain the spread of both mis and disinformation, Wikipedia relies on its global community of volunteers to determine its content and policies and to police the site. In the first year of the pandemic, 97,000 Wikipedia editors collaborated on almost 7,000 COVID-19 related articles in 188 languages, which were read more than 650 million times. So if millions of people are relying on the site for information, especially health information, it's imperative that we work to continue improving and updating the site. I'm now going to pass it off to Kelsey to discuss how Wikipedia and Wikipedians do this.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for that intro. Right, as you're all aware, like one of the most common critiques of Wikipedia is, you can't trust what's on it because anyone can edit it. And yes, that is true. Anyone can edit it. I'm sure you've seen examples of people, jokingly or seriously putting false information on Wikipedia. But unlike social media, where misinformation proliferates rapidly, it's difficult to remove or combat. As Jen sort of alluded to, Wikipedia has set itself apart because of its content standards and guidelines, like those 5 pillars she mentioned, the editorial community, and the technological affordances of the platform. And we're going to take a closer look at some of those. So, next slide. First, biomedical content on Wikipedia should be referenced with sources that comply with what are called the MedRS standards, or medical reliable sources. So MedRS tells editors that they should use current, secondary, and tertiary sources that reflect scientific consensus. So let's break that down a bit. First, sources ideally should come from the last 5 years. This is not a hard and fast rule, but more of a guideline aimed at encouraging editors to use the most up-to-date information possible. Secondly, editors should use secondary and tertiary sources when possible. So, of course, that means sources like systematic reviews, high-quality textbooks, and expert guidelines, not so much single studies. Third, these sources should reflect scientific consensus. And generally what that means is editors should look for sources that don't seem to be too biased, don't seem to have conflicts of interest, don't seem to cherry pick information, and are not relying on poor quality studies or bad methodology. This also means that fringe views like conspiracy theories do not need to be represented in Wikipedia articles. And just a little anecdote here to go with that. So in 2014, this group of alternative healers began circulating a petition with the purpose of having Wikipedia recognize practices like energy healing or thought field therapy. And Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales responded publicly, and he said, every single person who signed this petition needs to go back to check their premises and think harder about what it means to be honest, factual, truthful. Wikipedia's policies around this kind of thing are exactly spot on and correct. If you can get your work published in respectable scientific journals, that is to say, if you can produce evidence through replicable scientific experiments, then Wikipedia will cover it appropriately. So that was the MedRS standards. And next up are article quality scores. So each article is evaluated and scored based on the scale. You can view these scores on the talk page of an article. And this helps readers know how high quality the article they're reading actually is. So for instance, if you're looking at a stub class article, which is the lowest quality score, you can expect to see that the article is really incomplete. It probably needs more citations. It's going to lack details or context. Generally, you can assume that you should, read it with a grain of salt or look for more details elsewhere. And then above that is a start class article, which begins to be a little more complete, but it still is often going to have inadequate references and maybe some other issues. And then above that, moving up, we have C, B, and A class articles, which are basically what their names sound like. So C class articles are okay, B class articles are fairly good, and A class articles are quite good. As articles improve above B class, they're actually examined by impartial reviewers to make sure that they meet the standards for A class status. Articles can also be awarded good article or featured article status if they're nominated and reviewed independently. And featured article is the highest quality score on Wikipedia. And then next up, we have template warnings and article protection. So template warnings are going to be messages that are added by editors to alert readers of issues with the article. They're sort of like red flags at the top of the page. Editors can remove them when they feel like they've fixed the issue that they are alerting readers to. There are quite a few of these. So here are just a few examples. This article needs additional citations. So that's going to warn readers that there might be information in the article that isn't well supported. It should be viewed with caution. The factual accuracy of part of this article is disputed. That one can warn readers that there might be questionable information there that needs to be addressed or discussed. And then there's one that says the neutrality of the article is disputed, which warns readers that editors might have concerns that the article is biased. Another really helpful feature of Wikipedia on the right-hand side of the slide is that it has a system for articles to be protected or locked so that only editors that meet certain qualifications can edit that article. You can find this lock symbol in the upper right of an article page. And this is going to help protect articles from things like edit wars, misinformation being added by editors who don't follow content guidelines, or just questionable information being added at times where information is rapidly changing or isn't really known. So if you see this symbol, it's usually a sign that the information has been evaluated, and it should hopefully be pretty reliable. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Jen. She's going to talk a little bit more about Wikipedians or Wikipedia editors and what they do to ensure the health information on Wikipedia is reliable.
Yeah, so Wikipedians, which is what Wikipedia editors are referred to, they work to ensure that it's reliable. So one way to do this is to create a wiki project. So a wiki project is a group of contributors who want to work together as a team to improve a particular aspect of Wikipedia. So they often focus on a specific topic area, a specific part of the encyclopedia, or a specific kind of task. So I'm going to briefly mention three that are focused on health information. We have Wiki Project Medicine, which was started in 2004. It's a global collective of doctors and scientists who write articles, edit, and provide oversight of Wikipedia's medical page. And medical articles are among the most rigorously referenced and scrutinized on the site. Most changes to health-related articles are assessed by this cohort, and if the content and references don't meet their standards, the edits will be reverted. Medical editors insist on textbooks, peer-reviewed papers, or reports from prominent medical institutions. So preprints aren't permitted, and the information must have been peer-reviewed and published. So as Kelsey mentioned, like there are standards for medical articles. Wiki Project Med Foundation, which is also known as Wikipedia Medicine, it's a nonprofit corporation that was founded in December 2012 with the purpose of promoting development and distribution of healthcare content on Wikimedia projects. And this is done by forming collaborations with other like-minded organizations and working to develop greater access to the medical literature for Wikipedians, among many others. And they try to collaborate with health partners such as the World Health Organization, Cancer Research UK, and the National Institutes of Health. And then finally, we have the Wiki Journal of Medicine. It's an open access, free to publish Wikipedia integrated journal devoted to medicine and biomedicine. It's a part of the larger Wiki Journal publishing group. And its function is to put articles through academic peer review for stable, citable versions whose content can potentially benefit Wikipedia and other Wikimedia projects. So how is misinformation moderated, and is Wikipedia succeeding at this? So as we've talked about, Wikipedia has multiple checks designed to examine all revisions, starting with the editors. So for health articles, these are amateur and medical expert editors who take on different roles. Some add original content, others act as sub-editors who correct grammar or improve syntax. And experienced editors oversee newcomers, advising and correcting their work. And they're ultimately the decision makers of what information is included and what is deleted. Editors can also add articles to their personal watch list. So they're notified as soon as an edit is made on that particular page, and they can leap in to correct anything that's either poorly sourced or misleading. And talk pages are used to hold discussions between editors on how and why particular edits were made. And these talk pages are visible to everyone, so the editing process is fully transparent. The community also provides administrative oversight of pages which have been subject to repeated vandalism or edit wars. So in addition to locking the article itself, administrators are allowed to impose editing restrictions on editors who do not follow project expectations within contentious topics. And administrators are also allowed to set special rules on pages, such as locking it or only allowing certain people to edit. And contentious topics are specially designated topics that have attracted more persistent disruptive editing than the rest of the project. And I think it's also important to note that administrators are Wikipedia editors who've been granted the technical ability to perform special actions on English Wikipedia, and they assume these responsibilities as volunteers after they undergo a community review process. And then also we have the technology. So it's possible to view almost all previous versions of an article in the page history. The site has an advantage over other online platforms in its ability to remove misinformation. Poor or malicious edits can be reverted simply and efficiently. And founding member of Wiki Project Med Foundation, Dr. James Heilman, noted the structural advantages that Wikipedia provides, which the other major digital platforms don't have. And he says, quote, "It takes more time and effort to disrupt Wikipedia than it does to restore Wikipedia to a reliable level. It's the exact opposite on Twitter and Facebook, where it takes a second to spread false news, while getting those lies removed will take a lot of time and effort." We'll also move on to automated bots. So bots play an integral role on the Wikipedia platform. And of course, bots are automated, but they're designed by editors and approved by the community. And they're designed specifically to detect and revert malicious edits. And they're using keywords and other red flag material to identify and undo vandalism. They can also enforce bans on editors and check spelling. So these bots can quickly and efficiently edit articles, but as with all other edits on Wikipedia, it's possible to see what has been done on the history pages and reverse those edits if needed. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the principles of Wikipedia is that editors should treat each other with respect and civility. So often any disagreements can be resolved through the talk pages after editors have come to a consensus about a particular edit. But that doesn't always happen. So Wikipedia also has an arbitration process. And this process exists to impose binding solutions to Wikipedia conduct disputes that neither community discussion nor the administrators have successfully resolved. And the committee accepts cases related to editors' conduct. So if they're improperly editing or knowingly adding false information, after all routes to resolve the conduct issues have failed. And they'll make rulings to address the problems within the community. But it's important to note that they will not make editorial statements or decisions about how articles should read, because those are considered content decisions. So ultimately, in Wikipedia, the authority rests with the legitimacy and credibility of the sources as defined by its community. So in 2017, the Wikipedia community voted to ban the Daily Mail as a source. And in 2018, they banned the Breitbart News Network. So groups or individuals seeking a wide audience to share misinformation will often publish to more than one social media platform. And it's also common to cross-share links, which allow the flow of misinformation to spread unchecked through platforms and across platforms. But unlike social media platforms, Wikipedia's content is depersonalized and it carries no advertising. So it limits the way misinformation could spread. And if misinformation does find its way onto the site, the community, again, has created a series of checks to mitigate this. So we have the bots that are designed to examine all new revisions. You have the ability to monitor edits to sensitive pages by having a personal watch list. And there's also oversight by the administrators who can block or ban users or IP addresses. So there's quite a lot that can be done with misinformation. So now we're going to transition into editing campaigns, which are also known as editathons. So an editathon is a scheduled time when people gather together in person or virtually to edit articles, often on a particular subject. They're a great way to introduce people to editing since they can get feedback or guidance from more experienced Wikipedians. And it also provides a communal editing experience for all Wikipedians, and what is also often a very solitary experience. And so Wikipedia benefits from editathons because editors often have expertise in the particular topic they're editing. It's also an opportunity to diversify the editor base. In 2019, it was estimated that women make up 15 to 20% of Wikipedians, although previous surveys showed that it was only about 10%. Because an editathon takes place during a particular time frame, articles on a topic are quickly improved. With librarians especially, we often have access to offline materials that can make great references, in addition to journals and databases. And I'll now pass it back over to Kelsey to talk more about programming.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So in the past few years, especially, it's really accelerated, maybe I want to say in the past 5 years, Wikipedia has become more and more popular to use as an instructional tool. So we've seen a number of different courses reported on in the literature that integrate Wikipedia editing into credit-bearing classes on health communications or other medical school classes. But really, you can do this with any topic. You would just want to focus on Wikipedia articles that are on that topic. Just some programming ideas. At my library, we have a class that we offer usually every semester called Wikipedia for the Health Sciences. And in this class, we focus on how to evaluate biomedical articles on Wikipedia. We also do a brief intro to editing. We've also found that editathons make a really nice staff activity. Librarians, unsurprisingly, are pretty good at adding citations and improving the quality of Wikipedia articles. We usually align our classes and staff activities to fall during the site NLM editathons in the spring and fall, which Jen will talk to you about now.
Yes, so in 2018, NNLM began holding editathons, and we typically host them in the spring and the fall. And of course, we know librarians have access to medical journals. They know how to find credible sources, and they love to share information, so it's a perfect fit. It's also an opportunity to bring people together to work on a project. So as you've probably heard in all of these sessions, we have member organizations. And so this is a great opportunity to bring people from those member organizations together to work on editing on a particular topic that we choose each session. And it's very easy to do this because you can do it virtually because all of the editing is done virtually as well. And also librarians like statistics and keeping track of things, and the Wikipedia campaign dashboards are an excellent way to track the results of editathons. So on the previous slide, we had a short clip of some of the data that you can get from the editathons, but we also have been tracking since 2018, different stats that we've had. So we just completed our most recent editathon about 2 weeks ago. So that hasn't made it onto this spreadsheet. But over the years, not counting the spring, we've had more than 600 editors join us to edit and improve over 800 articles, often by adding citations to NLM and other reputable resources. And those articles have since been viewed over 15 million times. So I like to think that the editathons have helped to provide better health information to the world. In addition, NLM has also created a site NLM guide for organizers that will walk you through the steps of creating and setting up an editathon if that's something that you'd like to do with your organization. And you can access that at nlm.gov/wiki, along with information on joining any of our future campaigns. And so I hope in this quick presentation that we've been able to convey that crowdsourcing can help beat misinformation, but the job is never done. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us for an editathon in the future.
Well, thank you so much for your talk, as well as David's earlier talk. If anyone has questions for any of our speakers, please place them in the question and answer box or in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. I just have a first question to get us started for the Wikipedia group, when you've been tracking kind of the results and the outcomes for these editathons that you've been doing, have you looked at all about what happens to the edits that have been made and the content that's been added like over time, whether or not these edits are being, the information you're adding has been like removed, or the citations are being removed, or things, or other information that's being added that might change what the editathon added?
I have an experience with what you're talking about. So when I was teaching the class, someone was asking me about how to embed. Oh, I think it might have been a table from another source, and I looked into it, and it was really easy to do. However, what I found out, because it was removed, was that Wikipedia did not subscribe to that particular section of Creative Commons. So they took it down, and they let me know. So yeah, I mean, there are people actively doing that, and that was found in the talk pages. And I have seen where some people will go in and update citations, so then it will kind of take one citation down, so it puts more current information in the article, which is really what it's all about. So I've only seen a couple of articles where the talk pages have been kind of contentious, and maybe Jen and Kelsey have more experience, or even Benny. So, but that's my experience.
So yes, like Margie said, sometimes individual editors will keep track of the articles that they're working on and see edits that have been like, oh, they undid my edit. Why? And go back in and continue to edit. But usually it's not contentious, and the person will explain like, oh, this is why I took this down, or why I put in this new citation. But I don't think as a group we're checking all of the citations we're doing. That seems like a great project. I don't think we have the capacity for it right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for answering the question. Yeah, doing that sort of kind of like longitudinal tracking would definitely be a lot of additional work. If anyone has other questions, please put them into the chat or the question and answer.
I do have one interjection for the last group. I recall a couple of years ago monitoring the conversation of informatics, the genesis of it. And that seemed quite a contentious conversation between which field owns that word. Is it engineering? Is it information science? And then which region? So is it something that is perhaps from overseas? And then is it something from the US? And I think, I haven't checked, but I think that the decision was that it came from engineering-ish overseas, but I could be incorrect. But it was funny to watch that conversation change, and I automatically thought of the authors and what they were thinking about people, or the editors rather, and what they were thinking about the people making edits, because it seemed quite contentious.
No, sure. One thing I've learned is that sometimes the talk pages can be even more interesting than the actual article. Like I'll go in to find something, and then I get lost in the talk pages of trying to track down why edits were made. But now I'm gonna have to look up informatics and see what's happened with that.
I think you are right, David, that it's an engineering term. I took some health informatics classes, and it's the information about the information kind of thing. And it was health informatics, had a lot to do with what's going on now with healthcare. So I have a son who's an engineer. I'll have to get back with you on that.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, there is a question. Pat, so question just came in. Have you done any research on Wiki Project Medicine?
I can say personally, I haven't. I don't believe we have as a group, but I don't know if.
I'm just unclear what type of research the questioner would be interested in.
I haven't done any research, but we've used it. We've referred to it quite a bit in terms. So for instance, we did a campaign before the last one where we went in and found that Wiki Project Medicine has targeted over 1,000 articles that need citations. So we thought we would, for the greater good, just concentrate on those articles. So yeah, that's kind of I've interacted with it. And I think everybody else here can kind of go back and refer to it. Send our class, people that take our classes, we refer them to the page as well, just so they're familiar with that group of people and editors that are keeping track of the medical articles on the encyclopedia.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And I think with that, that brings us to the end of our session today. I've just got a couple last final things. Thanks one last time to all of our speakers. It was really, really great to have you today. And thanks to our audience. Thank you for coming and listening to our speakers today. If you're interested in claiming CE credit for this session, you will receive an email after the symposium ends. I believe there will also be a link shared at the closing session, which begins at 4:10 Eastern time, so in 13 minutes. And that will be with our project director, Martha Meacham. And thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you at our closing session.